Today's episode is part of the Learn About GAP, a more inclusive GAP project, co-funded by the European Union. Our guest today is someone who has made it her mission to live sustainably and help others do the same. Rachel Pettus, also known as the Paphos Green Goddess, is here to share her insights on how self-sufficiency, small-scale growing, and conscious living can reshape how we relate to food and the environment. Rachel, how did your journey into sustainable living and local food systems begin?
When I was first here, actually doing a Greek class at Koumoulis in Nicosia, I had an American friend who shared with me her copies of Acres USA, which is it's an American agricultural publication, but it's an alternative one. So I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but it's geared towards sustainables, organics, and things like that. I was pregnant with my first child. I'm married to a Cypriot who has family land. And I'd never really thought about organics before, except where I'd used to live. There was like a farmer's market and the organic, there was one organic booth, and we're talking about the 80s here, where they used to be sort of like hippies with knobbly carrots and things that didn't look right. And it was like, oh, organic. And so I didn't really think about it. And then I started reading the Acres USA, and she'd had a subscription to it. So I had a ton of reading material. And I was thinking, wow, there's a lot of things that we take for granted that really aren't very good for us. And so I said to my husband, could we make our land certified organic? And he was like, yes, madam, anything you like, madam. So we had already started growing mangoes because I spent time in Hawaii when I was a child. And I had said, I want mango trees. So he was like, okay, I'll grow you mango trees. Mm-hmm. So then we got certified organic back in the early 2000s. We were one of the first people to, and that's how it started.
And what does it mean to be the Green Goddess in practice?
I don't know. It's just my business name, I guess. I had to come up with something quite quickly. And I didn't realize at the time, but the Green Goddess is actually a name of both a fire engine. At the old Bedford trucks that the British Army used to use as fire engines were called the Green Goddesses. And it's also a salad dressing. So I kind of regretted my choice of name, but people recognize it. So I'm known in Paphos, and I don't know.
Good. That's good. It serves its purpose if you're known by that name. Now, you often describe your approach as permaculture-based. For someone who's never heard the term or maybe only has a vague idea, how would you define permaculture in a simple way?
Permaculture is a design process. So it is not only gardening. In other words, it can be applied to anything. It can be your apartment. It can be applied to your organization. I used to be part of an NGO in Paphos that supported refugees and asylum seekers. And when I was building the website for it, I realized that we had built the organization along permaculture lines. So what is permaculture lines, or what are permaculture lines? Permaculture is couched on three ethics. Before I go on, it became a term in use in Australia in the 1970s as something founded by two Australians, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. But what they were doing in creating their design system is enshrining knowledge and understanding and practices that had actually been operated by indigenous people for millennia. So it's nothing new. It's just that the name, which is an amalgamation of permanent and agriculture, has a name now. It's got a tag. So what is it? It's couched in 3 ethics. The first one is earth care, care for the environment. The second one is people care and community building, care for the people around you, and then by extension, your wider community. And if the ripple goes out, the whole planet. And the third one, which is known as the trickiest ethic, is fair share or return of surplus. So I'll give you an example of what is not permaculture. You might have a little small holding where you compost everything, and you have worms, and you have mulch, and you have all of the design features, or you work around the 10 principles, which are the things on which the ethics rest. And you may have all of those things and tick all those boxes, but if you employ a third country national and pay them crappy wages, and then you take the profits of your the workshops that you do and the teaching that you do and everything, and the fruit that you sell, and you go off for a holiday in Bali and stay in a 5-star resort, that is not permaculture, because it's a design system which is also a way of life. And I've been accused of, oh, you're doing something dogmatic and everything. It's not a dogma. It's a design system. But the design system encompasses all aspects of the design. You don't pick and choose.
So it's a holistic approach. It's not just about agriculture.
No, not at all.
Now, what makes permaculture different from organic gardening or sustainable farming?
Okay, the ethics and the principles. Organics is simply ticking the boxes that when you get an organic inspector come and say, okay, here's your certificate, now you can sell for the 30% up premium. You do not have to do any designing, like for water retention or waste management or anything like that. You just have to avoid using the substances that are prohibited under organic farming. So your first question was, what's the difference between organic? And the second part of the question was?
What's the difference between permaculture and sustainable farming?
Okay, so with sustainable, you're getting a bit closer. Because sustainable is the idea that you are living within the boundaries of what the area that you're in can provide. So you're not planting trees or flowers or something that are not suited to the climate or the conditions that you're in. Instead, you're using practices which minimize water use, for example, or maximize your microclimates to get the outputs that you want. Permaculture, as you said earlier, is holistic. After sustainable, you've got something called regenerative. And regenerative is the place that we find that we need to be in now. It's not enough to be sustainable. We've done so much damage and used so many resources that we need to build them again. So organic, okay, the only thing about organic is you don't use prohibited substances, and there's various things that you can and can't use. But you can be very unsustainable while being an organic farmer.
Permaculture only for people who have land, or can elements of it be practiced in small urban spaces too?
Absolutely. A lot of it has to do with, as I said, design. So if you are in a small urban space, for example, in an apartment building, there's very little that you can do to change your aspect. But you can certainly use shade. You can use an awning, for example, to make your veranda cooler or your kitchen cooler and block the sun. You can compost. you can refuse plastic. You can use your balcony to grow things, and you can catch rainwater.
So there are things that people can do no matter where exactly they live. That's nice.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk a bit about permaculture in the Cypriot context.
Let me just go back to that. We're a small space.
Yeah, sure.
The other thing, permaculture, as I said, the second ethic is people care. Know your neighbors. Cooperate with your neighbors. Carpool. Cook together. Build community. That's, you know, it's not just about growing things. It's also about sharing and building community, because the more community you have and the more diversity you have, the more resilience you have. And it's all about design for resilience.
That's very nice. Now, talking about resilience, let's talk about permaculture in the Cypriot context. What are some permaculture techniques you personally use that work well in the hot, dry Cypriot climate?
Okay, I have about 125 square meters of roof. All of that is guttered, and it all runs into 4 8-ton tanks. So I catch 32 tons of rainwater, at least, in a winter. Given Paphos's previous annual rainfall, which was 50 centimeters, that means I can catch 75 tons of water on my roof. And the issue then is storing it and using it. Now, what I also have done is I've plumbed that rainwater into the downstairs house in the cold water. So the toilets, the washing machine, and various things use that rainwater. And then I have a grey water system from the washing machine that comes out and waters the trees. Okay. The other thing that you can do, and which I have done, is I have designed my garden to catch water. Around every tree on the downslope is a berm, so the rainwater comes into that. And then the garden itself is small terraces, so the water flows down. So ideally, you want to slow down the flow of water when it comes. I've also made curb cuts in our road, taken out stones, so the water flows off the road, which is a graded road, not gravel, not asphalt, sorry, and into the garden. And we've got quite a steep hill, and I did this just last year, speed bumps to channel the water into the trees that are next to the road. And then also graded, I got the contractor to build the concrete road so that the water is diverted into channels and holding basins that overflow down to the next step. So the biggest thing that you can do here is invest in groundwater retention systems, because you store the water in the soil. Mulch, cover the soil, never have bare soil, things like that.
Okay, and in this way you tackle one of the biggest problems at this time in Cyprus, water and not receiving enough rain.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. And how does permaculture help us deal with challenges like water scarcity that you've already mentioned? How about soil degradation? How does permaculture help us with that?
Well, you never have bare soil, so your soil is always covered. And if you cover it with biomass, so like straw, manure, mulch, wood chippings, then the soil is constantly being fed by this diet of mulch that you put on the top, and it improves the soil. So recently, my son and I have been working with a system called syntropic agroforestry, which we learned about on a course recently in Portugal. And a lot of that has to do with building the soil through the addition of biomass and pruning the trees as they grow and pruning the plants and the shrubs as they grow and dropping it on the soil so that the soil is always covered to keep it more humid, but also so that the soil life is constantly being replenished and augmented, improved.
Do you think local farmers could benefit from incorporating permaculture methods into their existing practices?
Yeah, because there's, under the 3 ethics, there's 12 or 10 principles. And you don't have to use all of them, but there's things like create no waste, observe and integrate, observe what's going on around you, find out where the microclimates are, just pay attention. A lot of people don't pay attention. They just do what their fathers do, not necessarily what their grandparents and great-grandparents did. So in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, where there was the quote-unquote Green Revolution, and everybody started spraying things and started, doing things, and also the building of the dams made people think, oh, we've just got water all the time. It's not something that we have to plan for. So the ways that the earlier generations used to practice sustainability for their households and their communities were forgotten because, now we just spray it and we just irrigate it and it doesn't matter anymore. So yeah, I had somebody visit the other day and they were looking at my field, which is not bare earth. There's no bare earth on it. And he said, yeah, but the weeds compete with the trees. And I was like, well, actually they don't. And if you take the weeds away, the soil temperature is going to go up. And, so we cut them and they don't compete. They just improve the whole humidity and soil biodiversity and things like that. But he was very, very schooled in the idea that in order to make money, because also it's all very geared to not just, I'm not trying to romanticize subsistence farming by any means. We all need money and we all have ambitions and that take cash to realize. So I'm not in any way trying to say we should all go back to the days of our great-grandparents. But the push for making money has led to monocropping, has led to the high use of inputs, to get a quote-unquote high yield. But while that might work for the first couple of years, then the yield starts to drop and you have to increase your inputs. And the spiral then starts going down. So I think the spiral is going down now for a great many Cypriot farmers. And younger ones, people in their 30s or 40s, perhaps, who are stuck. They don't know the old ways, and they've learned the new ways. They don't quite know what to do. So turning to look at the principles of permaculture could be very enlightening and helpful. It doesn't mean you have to become a full permaculture designer, but to pay attention and to think, this isn't working. What can I do to help?
Very nice. And I hope that young people can understand this as the years pass by. Now, speaking of working with the land and respecting its cycles and respecting it, you also make wine at your farm, a beautiful example of how permaculture can extend from garden to glass. Now, can you tell us a bit about your winemaking? How did you get started with wine?
My husband likes good wine. He is a wine aficionado. He knows a lot about wine. He didn't study enology, but he's over the years refined his ideas. So we had with the land. So, he planted vines and he was like, well, okay, I'm going to learn how to make wine. And he did, because he knows a lot about it. And so that's the way he went. We are looking at doing more sustainable things, like, I keep teasing him about having ducks in the vineyard for pest control and things like that. And we might. But basically, I don't know a great deal about winemaking. When he tells me, we're going to do this today, I was just like, yeah, okay, point me there and I'll do it. But I cannot talk about winemaking, really.
And now in Cyprus, where wine is such a historic tradition, do you think there's room for more small-scale sustainable winemakers?
I would imagine so. In the last 20 years, Cypriot winemaking has become a lot more refined than when I was first here. And I was first here in September 1990. There is a lot of very good winemakers, but not being a winemaker and not really knowing about the varieties and everything, I can't really comment on that, but there's always room for it. The thing about wine is, well, winemaking is at some point you reach a stage where you have to mechanize. So for years, we used to, obviously we pick by hand, but we used to step on the grapes and we used to sit there for hours and hours pulling off the grapes and blah, blah, blah. And finally I got fed up and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. Either we get a machine or we stop. And he didn't want to stop, of course, so we got some machines. But we're at the stage where if you go more, and we make about 300 bottles a year, 360 bottles a year, if you get bigger than us, you have to be more mechanized. So that cuts a lot of people out because they can't afford the machinery.
Okay, so in a way it stops being small scale.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what is small scale. Is it 1,000 bottles, which would be 3 times what we make? 10,000 bottles, I think that's, but it's a mechanization issue.
Now, they use Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, increasingly promotes practices that support environmental sustainability, biodiversity, and local food systems. In a way, your lifestyle aligns with these broader goals, even though you're not a full-time farmer. Also, many of the ideas you're sharing, like building soil health, conserving water, and growing locally, are now supported at the policy level through the Common Agricultural Policy. From your perspective, what kinds of support, whether from communities, municipalities, or even consumer habits, make it easier for people to live and grow more sustainably?
It's hard for me to answer that because I live in a bit of a bubble. I don't have social media particularly. I don't interact with the Greek language media. So I just live on my little hillside and I do my thing. I'd like to say education. There's a couple of NGOs. I think the Cyprus Environment Foundation. I think Terra Cypria, which is Limassol based. And I think Terra Cypria goes into schools and does workshops in schools. So, I mean, I don't want to comment on the current recycling issue, but teaching particularly young people about waste. If you go out in the countryside, what do you see? You see plastic cups that are brought by the hunters who allegedly love nature. Take your own cup. Go to the drive-in cafe. We just did this morning when I was working in the field with my daughter. We had our own mugs. We went to the drive-in cafe near and we said, can you make us a cappuccino in this? Yes, they did. That's 2 less cups that get thrown out. So I think educating about waste and waste management, we are an island. And the more we learn to respect what we do with the things we use, I think the better. And that stretches to agriculture with things like fossil fuels, soil conditioning, like fertilizers, compost, mulch, all of that stuff, rather than buying the conventional thing because, oh, my roses don't look nice, so I've got to go and buy some chemical stuff. It's education, and it's education as always starting with kids. But I don't know because I don't know enough about it.
How important do you think it is to create stronger local food networks, whether it's markets, co-ops, or knowledge sharing among growers?
Very important. When I've spent time in Greece, I used to spend a lot of time in Chania in Crete. 3 times a week or 4 times a week. In different parts of the city, you have a laiki. And the laiki is packed with stall holders that have a range of things from locally produced yogurt to honey to olives to fresh vegetables to fruit to all kinds of stuff. And it thrives. So the shoppers come, the housewives come, the old guys come to chat to their friends, to do their shopping. We don't have that. We have a municipal market in Paphos that on Saturday happens. And I think there's one in Nicosia, and there's some very good initiatives to end the waste in the Nicosia municipal market. But what has happened to our community markets? If you go to the one in Paphos, yes, you find local growers, but you also find people who are importers. So right beside the local Cypriot produce from the guys up in the hills who have brought their struthkia and their, their asparagus and their little bits and pieces and their tomatoes and everything, right beside that, you've got a bin of imported oranges to Cyprus, apples and things from people who are not growers, but who are merchants. So recently, I was made aware of a situation where a family had to sell off their very productive fruit and olive producing land because the government cut the water. So they sold it to a foreigner who sold it to another foreigner who's going to build 5 villas there. Now, those 5 villas are going to take a hell of a lot more water than the farmer, because they're all going to have swimming pools and they're all going to have a lot of embodied energy with the concrete, with the garden systems they put in, because it's a very wealthy guy who's bought it and he wants to develop it in a very posh way. So it's back to the same argument in a way, and I don't know if I'm getting off the subject, but about people needing to recognize what's important. If we can't feed ourselves, there's no point in having a swimming pool.
Exactly. Now, how do you see the connection between the food we choose to consume and the impact we have on the planet?
Well, the first and most obvious one is if you eat imported food, then it's got food miles. So it's got to be shipped here. One of the things that I find ludicrous, and I can't remember how I learned this, so the details might be wrong, but I think in the whole thing, it's true, is Cyprus is a huge producer of carobs, or it certainly was. Now, I think that a lot of those carobs get exported to Spain, where they get made into carob flour, and then they get imported back into Cyprus as carob flour. That's a little bit ridiculous. I have 3 or 4 carob trees here. I harvest the carobs. I make my own carob flour, and then I teach people how to use it. So why would, it's also, I do some sort of catering for friends and things like that. And I will always say that I buy local rather than buying organic, because in the case of almonds, I can buy local almonds in bulk for 12 euros a kilo. But if I try and buy organic almonds, which possibly are Cypriot, they might be Spanish, I'm not sure where they come from, but they're wrapped in plastic and they're something like 30 euros a kilo. So first of all, get to know your local farmer so that you know what your local farmer produces. Eggs, tomatoes, it shortened the food chain. The shorter the food chain, the better for the planet. Well, even if the local food might not be organic, the amount of emissions or pollution or whatever put into getting that to us cancels out any good that your organic certification has done the guy in Germany,
Moving on, what does self-sufficiency look like in Cyprus? Can someone living in a city or without a garden still participate meaningfully?
Mm-hmm. first of all, as I said earlier, about building community. So you might not be able to do something, but your neighbor might. And together, then you find somebody else and you each provide components for different things. So you might not have a garden, but your neighbor might, but your neighbor might not have time to work in the garden. So that's one facet. You can create community and share skills. The second thing is you can always compost. And again, you might not have the outside space that allows you to use that compost that you create, but your neighbor with the garden might. So sharing is a huge part of that. But there's also different kinds of composting, like bokashi composting, which I don't know very much about, is completely unsmelly, and you can do it under your sink in an apartment. But you need a starter to do it. Other things that can contribute to self-sustainability, as I say, catch water, so that at least you don't use rainwater to water your plants with. Grow herbs on the windowsill. One of the things that drives me absolutely nuts is I'll go to the supermarket and there's plastic boxes full of basil, rosemary, origani, sage, parsley. And I think, why do you put this in a plastic box, for one thing, first of all? They cost €1 something. People must buy them because the market keeps being there. Grow your own herbs so that you don't have to buy a plastic box of herbs for €1.50 every time you want to have the caprese salad with basil, you know? It's easy.
Now, why is growing food, even in a small way, so powerful for sustainability?
I think one of the things is because it's the start of something. In a lot of ways, we become disempowered. If you feel that you don't know how to do something, you will call somebody else. Learning a skill is the start of a whole, the other thing we all sort of think about is, my mental health, I can't do this. You learn a skill, you learn one skill, it succeeds. You eat a tomato that you've grown or a lettuce or something, and you think, bloody hell, I could do this. I could do it. Let's try it again. And so instead of just growing a tomato plant, you grow a tomato and a pepper plant. And then maybe some parsley or something like that. So it's empowering. It's very, very good for your self-esteem. It also, it brings you in touch with something living instead of relying on supply chains. And we found out how fragile those could be in COVID. And it gives you an idea that you can be independent. Even in a tiny way.
Yeah. You already spoke of education, and now you're speaking of empowerment. And I want to ask you, yes, you run workshops and community events. What do people usually get most excited about?
My worms and chickens.
Okay.
And I think that's because they are, the trees and everything, they're all living too. But the chickens, because I have chickens in a movable coop, so they spend the night in a fixed place where they're safe and from foxes and dogs and whatnot, and they can roost. And then every day I move them to a different place. And so they go under the trees and they eat the pests and they fertilize it and they aerate the soil by scratching the thing, and and then you move them the next day. And kids particularly, but even grown-ups, they love interacting with the chickens. And it gives them a real buzz if I get the chicken out of the coop and I hand them a chicken and they're going like, oh, I'm touching a chicken, kind of, But it's something alive. And people are used to, okay, they interact with cats and dogs and they're alive. But the chickens and the worms, and kids love worms, even adults love worms. I took a bunch of adults the other day and, scurried around in the worm bin and picked up a handful of worms. And I was like, there you go. And there was a second of like, oh my God. And then it was like, oh my God. And they're like, what do you do with them? So I say, well, they eat the compost and then they make fertilizer and all this stuff. So it's that living element that people get excited about. But they also get excited because I teach them ways that they can save money and make their own stuff, which again is empowering. And I think people find that exciting.
How can we bring more young people and children closer to nature and food systems in a meaningful way?
Organize ekdromes from schools to farms, or to not even necessarily to farms, but one of the wonderful things about Cyprus is still intimately connected to the land. Even in the middle of Nicosia, where you've got like wealthy business people and whatever, they have a Paphos and Yaya who live up in the village, who have some olives, who have some chickens, there is still that connection. There's very, very few Cypriot families or Cypriot people who do not have an auntie or an uncle or somebody in their family who still works the land. So exploit those connections. Use them in the schools.
Very
today
nice.
We're going to go and visit Andreas's Paphos. He lives in the village, and he's got these trees and maybe Paphos isn't organic. Maybe he sprays things. It doesn't matter. It's the connection to the land.
Yeah, this will bring more to the children rather than explaining about organic agriculture, I guess. Yeah.
Let them touch the chickens instead of being, oh my God, the microbia. It's like it's life, literally. And it's where things come from. It's your milk comes from, or your halloumi comes from a goat and a sheep. Go and see the goat and the sheep that make your halloumi. Personally, I don't eat meat. But if you eat meat, know that that animal is what provides your souvlaki. Go and meet them. And maybe you won't eat pork anymore.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, that's a whole different conversation.
Yes, exactly.
But know where your food comes from. And still in Cyprus, we have good practices, although it's getting harder to find.
Now, to wrap up the podcast, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who wants to begin living more sustainably, where should they start?
Refuse plastic. Plastic is going to be on the planet a lot longer than you are. So every time you get a takeaway coffee, that cup's going to be around. So carry a cup in your car. Every time you go to Costa Coffee or something like that, use your cup. I mean, okay, now cloth shopping bags, everybody has them because we went through a period where we were being charged for them. I've been using cloth shopping bags for 30 years, long before it was cool. So think about waste. Think about ordering stuff from overseas in fast fashion. Think about, I don't know how this is how to balance this because I don't know enough about it, but data uses a lot of water. And I read somewhere in the news the other day something about, where Cyprus is going to be a data hub and this and that and the other. And I thought, we don't have the water to do that. When I wash up in the sink, I have a double sink, thank you. When I wash my hands, when I wash a lettuce, when I rinse something that doesn't have soap, all that water goes into that basin and I take it out on the veranda and I water my plants with it. Be aware of stuff. That's how you become more self-sustaining. Do an audit so that you understand. Do a water audit. How much water do I use in a day? Where does my water come from? How can I reuse my water? Water here is just, it's such a cliche, but water is life. And we got a lot less of it than we had before.
Yeah. So thank you very much for today's podcast. I'm sure our our viewers, young people, or even farmers that listen to us will benefit greatly from your share of experience and your share of knowledge. Thank you very much.
Okay.